go through a few logistical points before I walk through our agenda for today. We are offering CPE credit for today's program, and we'll be asking CPE questions at 2 different points through the program. If you have requested to receive CPE, make sure that you respond to the questions, or even if you haven't requested, but you would like to get CPE, you can still do so by responding to the questions, and then we'll follow up with you later on. Also, as we go through the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to click on the Q&A link in the that you'll see on your console, and you can key your questions in there, and we'll take them through the presentation as they come up. If you have any kind of technical issues going through the program, any kind of audio problems, things like that, please send us an email at support, SUPPORT, @xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. Okay, with that, I'm going to move ahead in our presentation and start first with the agenda and also introductions. We're going to start first with what ESG investors want, and we're happy to have with us today Mohini Singh. Mohini is the Director of the Financial Reporting Policy at CFA Institute. Mohini is also a member of our XBRL US Working Group on ESG, and so she's going to share with us what ESG investors are looking for. We're then going to move on to a presentation by Anna Kwok. Anna is Vice President of Structured Data Initiatives at Workiva. She is also co-chair of our XBRL US ESG Working Group. And Anna is going to share with us some actual ESG reports in machine-readable format, including Etsy as well as Moody's. We'll then take a couple of CPE questions and turn the presentation over to Dean Ritz. Dean is Senior Advisor to the CEO of the Open Data Policies and Practices at Workiva. And Dean is also Anna's co-chair of the XBRL US ESG Working Group. Dean is going to share some of the working group findings and recommendations that we have identified over the course of working together, and talk a little bit about a paper that will be coming out sometime in the coming weeks that's based on those findings. Then we'll take our final CPE questions. So with that, I'm going to turn to the next slide and turn the discussion over to Mohini.
Thank you, Michelle. So what do investors want? Investors today are demanding sustainability information as they see environmental, social, and governance factors as vital to the evaluation of a company. Investors need the information to assess how companies are managing these issues and the impact they have on a company's long-term performance. Regulators are also increasingly focusing on material ESG data due to increasing demand from investors and issues like climate change. The problem is that while a number of sustainability frameworks and standards already exist, this has led to a patchwork of reporting requirements that needs rationalizing. Currently, there are several sustainability reporting requirements, each with a different focus. For example, some focus on non-financial standard setting, some on frameworks for non-financial information, and others on frameworks for climate-related disclosures. As ESG issues gain prominence in the investing and business worlds, many companies and investors have expressed interest in further adopting sustainability strategies. These efforts, however, can be impeded without reliable data. The lack of consistent, universal metrics to measure companies' ESG performance is often cited as the key obstacle for investors in integrating ESG in their investment process and to companies' ability to compare their performance to their peers. There is increased interest amongst investors in obtaining consistent, comparable ESG-related data from companies worldwide, including those listed on the US markets. The Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment notes that US assets under management using sustainable investing strategies grew 42% from $12 trillion in 2018 to $17 trillion in 2020. And sustainable investing assets account for $1 in $3 of assets under management. Standardization of metrics and disclosures on the effects of sustainability issues on a company's present and future results is needed to bring consistency and comparability in sustainable reporting. Next slide, please. Global regulators are paying close attention. Significantly, the IFRS Foundation announced the formation of the International Sustainability Standards Board, tasked with creating a set of high-quality, globally comparable, digitized sustainability standards. In addition, the IFRS Foundation announced the consolidation of the Climate Disclosure Standards Board and the Value Reporting Foundation, composed of the Integrated Reporting Framework and the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And this will be done by June of this year. US regulators are also taking action. In March of 21, the SEC published a request for comment on climate change disclosures, and it is expected that a rule proposal may be issued by the SEC early this year. But I would like to emphasize that investors don't just need more reliable and more comparable information. They also need it in an easily consumable format. Currently, since regulators don't require it, companies don't structure their ESG disclosures, which means that they are not machine readable. Since structuring the information enables it to be more efficiently consumed by investors and other users, data providers have started structuring that data themselves for their investment clients. In doing so, they analyze the information provided by the company and provide them an ESG score. However, if companies take control and structure their own disclosures, they can tell their own story and actually improve communication with investors. Next slide, please. Given the heightened interest in climate and other ESG related disclosures, and the expectation that digitization of these disclosures is a needed part of the solution, XBRL US established the XBRL US ESG Working Group to investigate how XBRL could be used to support the automation of climate and other ESG disclosures, and thus make it more easily consumable by investors and other users. The working group includes representatives who are SEC filers, corporate governance and investor relations professionals, analysts and investors, as well as XBRL software providers. Our paper, in addition to several XBRL formatted ESG reports, illustrates how ESG data can be rendered machine readable and provides the results delivered by the working group. The paper presents issues in ESG reporting today and explains how data standardization can assist by providing relevant information in a format that supports evaluation and comparability. Implementations of machine-readable data can be created when the reporting area is backed by domain standards that concretely define terms and how terms are related to each other. It is this relatedness that raises the standard to that of a framework, as a framework captures not just terms, but how these terms are structured in relationship to each other. The growing number of ESG frameworks on the market is a demonstration of global interest, yet multiple standards, particularly because they overlap in their coverage, can make it difficult to consistently prepare and analyze ESG data. Many companies pick and choose from multiple standards to report their ESG metrics, responding to investor requests for a variety of data points that don't exist within a single framework. To achieve accurate, consistent reporting in the presence of multiple standards and absent SEC reporting rules, there must be a common understanding or classification of the data points as used by the ESG community. And this classification also must express sufficient detail to enable data integration across standards and to avoid potential ambiguity or misunderstandings. Such standardization forces consensus building and ultimately informs regulators. Regulators need to be able to create a single framework that allows the relating and perhaps even the merging of multiple ESG frameworks. This is in the best interest of investors who require comparable data in an easily consumable format to make informed investment decisions. To sum up, ESG reporting must take a digital-first approach. Thanks, Michelle.
Mohini, thank you very much. I'm now going to turn our presentation over to Anna Kwok, and I'm going to stop sharing here. And Anna is going to walk us through some examples of actual ESG reports in machine readable format.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. Let me share my screen. And I would appreciate a thumbs up or acknowledgement that you're able to see the screen.
Yep, looks good.
Great. All right, so as Michelle Mohini indicated, I have prepared a couple of examples of ESG reports with machine readable data in XBRL format with everyone today. And so the report that we have on the screen is actually Moody's 2020 SASB report. We are very excited to have been able to prepare this report with the company's help. And what you're seeing is actually a document inside a software that can prepare XBRL, such as what the product that I'm showing on the screen right now. And so for those who are maybe not totally familiar with the XBRL preparation process, what is involved is that the document, the ESG document needs to that may have already been prepared or needs to be prepared. The content needs to be brought into a tool that can actually then complete the XBRL tagging. And so in Workiva, the tagging is completely done inline. So what we're seeing on the screen here is the document, and where you're seeing the green color coding there actually indicate that it is something that has been XBRL tagged. So if I clicked on that, you see something popping up on the right-hand side here that is going to show me what the XBRL concept is, what time period this element represents, and so on. And so the process of preparing XBRL is actually very, very easy and simple. It involves, obviously some understanding of the taxonomy, and the taxonomy can be viewed directly on top of the document. And so, for example, what we are seeing here is that the element that represent this particular description of approach to identifying addressing data security risk, this is what is called a text block element. And right within the document, you would be able to visualize, where does this element actually apply? To what industry does the element apply? And you can visualize also other relevant information related to this element, such as, what item type is this, and what are the authoritative references that this pertains to, and so on. So it's a very easy process to identify and select the right item. Especially what we're seeing here is a SASB report, and as many of you may know, SASB released their first official taxonomy in 2021. And the organization of the taxonomy is actually very clear. First by industry group, and then within the industry group by the applicable SASB codes. And so when I'm looking at something, I can always easily navigate to the appropriate section. So for example, something that indicate 23A1. Now, obviously, this is for the professional services industry. So I am able to navigate over there as well. Let me just, I'm gonna enlarge this a little bit so I can scroll.
Sorry, Anna, could you make your screen a little larger, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. A certain part of this actually cannot enlarge more. I can definitely try to do this. Is it better now?
It is, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, so my point there was that we can navigate the taxonomy directly within the document. The taxonomy is organized in a fashion that would very closely align to a report like the SASB index, where your disclosures are already organized by the SASB code, and the taxonomy element would very closely match those SASB codes. So the element selection process would be very easy. Now, that is the general organization of the taxonomy. What we are seeing here is actually in a document editor. This is in itself not the XBRL output. After finished preparing, then this can be generated into the iXBRL document, which is what I'm opening up on the screen here right now. And let me see if I can actually enlarge this some more. And so you see that this looks exactly like the document that we looked at last, except now this document is actually an iXBRL file. And what we are seeing is actually seeing the XBRL information in what we call a generic iXBRL viewer. For those who are familiar with the SEC XBRL program, you may be accustomed to an SEC XBRL viewer that looks like this. And what we are showing here is actually a more generic viewer, because the SASB report, the SASB taxonomy, or any ESG taxonomy that may become available could be applied in other contexts. And so what I had just done is like highlighting the XBRL elements. And as you can see, we have the similar capability within the iXBRL viewer to see the XBRL tagging. And that is really the beauty of iXBRL, is that now you can actually see human readable information and machine readable information all in the same place. So when I open up this side panel here, as you can see, very similar to what you were seeing within the XBRL software, is that we have the ability to then view the XBRL elements that represent these disclosures, all the metadata related to it, and so on. Now, what I really want to spend a little bit of time on today is to go over some examples of where, based on the experience of preparing some of these initial, ESG report tagged with XBRL, there are actually some ESG specific consideration when it comes to applying XBRL to ESG report. For example, what you may see here is that ESG report, as you are all very familiar with, is that could contain a lot of hyperlinks. And so, I have the ability to actually click on the hyperlink, and it will actually bring me to the content. I'm sorry, I clicked something wrong here. That I would be able to open up the linked materials. Now, the one thing that may be a consideration for XBRL for ESG is that certain regulators, such as like the SEC, doesn't actually allow external references, so hyperlinks are not allowed. And so this may be something that should be taken into consideration, either in clarifying expectations, or potentially doing something different to support, whatever the case may be. Another thing that is useful to note is that when it comes to XBRL, XBRL has the capability that has an inherent capability in, essentially all the XBRL elements in the taxonomy are associated with a particular item type or data type. And so when we look at, let me see, click on this here. When we look at a XBRL element, for example, like what we're seeing here is that the disclosure here is a number of data bridges. And so what does this tell us about the disclosure? Well, it's number of. And so what logically follows is that disclosure should be a numeric value. And that numeric value, for example, with this particular item type, it is actually what is called a non-negative item type. So non-negative integer item type. So what this tells us is that XBRL has the capability of ensuring that the disclosure in terms of data quality is provided in a whole number, and it needs to be non-negative. And so this is just one example of XBRL features that can help with the representation of ESG data in a machine readable format that is going to give a much richer context than what may be just visible in a paper or visual report or presentation report. Now, obviously, we know that the number of data breaches, this disclosure doesn't usually come in a negative amount and all that stuff, and which we totally understand. But I'm just giving that as an example of the kind of things that the XBRL features can do for us. I'm going to go over some additional examples later on that involve different types of item types that are specific to certain ESG disclosures as well. The other thing that I want to illustrate here is also the fact that we have what we call an XBRL footnote. As I mentioned earlier, the number of data bridges is actually a numeric element. So as such, we would expect that the disclosure to be a numeric value. But as you can see on the report here, there is a very specific and valid reason for why this disclosure was not provided. It's for confidentiality reasons. And in that case, for the user of this data, when they may be looking for this particular data point, in the machine readable format, there is also a ability for us to do this in XBRL, whereby we can actually create an empty fact, but use a capability called XBRL footnote. And then we can attach this narrative as an XBRL footnote to this particular fact, which is actually an empty fact, but explaining the same thing. So as you can see on the side here, it has exactly the same text as what is in this box. So these are some examples of how XBRL are actually ready and able to support ESG disclosures as far as a couple of examples that I want to highlight from this document. Next, I want to look at a couple of examples that may point towards more of where maybe XBRL or other guidance and best practices may need further development in order to support, really smooth ESG reporting in XBRL. So, for example, I am going to navigate to this next table here, which is a gender metric table. And as you can see, under this particular industry, the professional services, and for the percentage of gender, the breakdown should be by executive management and all other employees, and which is exactly what the company did here, the executives as well as the rest of the employees. Now, the difference is the company also went a step further and break down the rest of the employees by the levels. And so in XBRL, there is definitely a feature called Dimension that can help handle this type of situation very flexibly. And where the area of developments may be needed is, number one, are there opportunities for further taxonomy development to support this type of disclosures? How common is this type of breakdown? May be a consideration, as well as when if this does become a requirement by a certain regulator, then there should be clear expectation setting as far as would extensions be created for this, and what would be the method of supporting this. For example, if the taxonomy does provide a dimension for breaking this down, but it is actually something specific to another industry. In that scenario, should that be used for this disclosure? Should it be a unique extension? Those are all things that I think the industry still need a little bit of practical implementation experience in order to, kind of build up that best way of XBRL reporting for ESG. So I want to then kind of identify one more example from this example document, and that is a feature of what we call hidden tagging. And let me just scroll to the right place there. All right, so we have a disclosure in this report that is about the amount of monetary losses as a result of legal proceedings associated with professional integrity. And as many of you are very familiar, it is actually very common for some of these ESG reports to have references to other content because, based on the usage, the media that is the most appropriate for that content could vary. And then when it comes to preparing a report, there are opportunities for referencing the other material as opposed to recreating, which, obviously would lengthen the reports and therefore the burden to create the reports and things like that. In XBRL, there is a capability called hidden tagging where, again, you might see that when I click on the element there, when this refreshed, you can see that there is a reference here that says material proceeding is actually in the 10K, but that you also see that there is then hidden facts shown here as far as, let me just see here, I'm sorry, back, oops, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing, so let me navigate back to the right place. One moment there. Okay, so you will see that what may be a possibility, and again, this is where maybe further development could really beneficial the stakeholders, is what would be the proper handling, or the best way to handle this in a situation like this is there's a capability to actually bring the content into a hidden format so that we are still able to tag this description with the SASB element that actually is a text block element, and it would allow us to present that content in the text block. But then the question is the hidden tagging the best way to handle this, or what the regulators' expectation may be? So here are just some few practical considerations in the implementation of one report. We were very happy and impressed with our collaboration with the company in preparation of this, and really appreciate the opportunity for us to learn a lot about how the XBRL should work from for ESG reporting purposes. Then I have the next example, which is actually a full 10K document. Again, what we were looking at here was a SASB standalone report, but the beauty of XBRL is that the financial information and the non-financial information could be reported in a single report, and XBRL can actually support taking both sources of information together in one place. And so what I have here is an example of the ETSI's 2020 SASB taxonomy report, not taxonomy, the SASB disclosure. As you can see, this is a SASB standalone document that looks very similar to the Moody's report. But what we also have here is actually the SASB's 10K document. And as you can see, this is their full 10K. And you can see that there, besides the ESG information, there is also their financial statement and their disclosure notes. And this is all within one single document. And we have the, and so, from a data consumption standpoint, it becomes very convenient, obviously, because the data can be in one single package, and the navigation of both taxonomy can be done in the same location. And so therefore lower the burden of preparation and all that. When it comes to the viewer for the 10K, again, this would be the normal SEC filings in the 10K iXPR viewer. This would be what we call our generic iXPR viewer. The idea is that XBRL data is machine readable and actually can be rendered and presented in different format. It is not the presentation style that matters, but the machine readable information. So this really actually illustrates the power of bringing this content into a machine readable format. And just a couple more examples real quick before I turn it over to Dean. Another example of where XBRL can actually help clarify the meaning of ESG disclosures is maybe, this particular example here where it's an entity-defined measure of user activities. SE, as you all know, is an e-commerce company. And so this is an important metric to them. And so, in XBRL elements, there is something called a period type that is associated with the element. So every disclosure would be, or every element would be either as of a duration of time, such as year of 2018, year 2019, or as of a particular point in time. So as of December 31, for example. Now, if you read a report sometimes, or maybe even oftentimes, that is not clearly identifiable or easily discernible. But with XBRL, that meaning is going to become very clear. Now, that said, that is also an area where then there's potential consideration for future taxonomy development, because it depends, like maybe the taxonomy has duration and not what we call instant, which is as of a certain time, or vice versa. And all this situation is going to happen. We have seen this in the financial taxonomy, evolution, where it grew from a much smaller taxonomy to, a taxonomy that may be, almost double its original size. And so all these things could just, be enhanced over time. So that's all part of, the consideration here. Another thing that I want to highlight is then also what is also very common, as you all know, in ESG report is that there should be a lot of chart or other graph and graphics and things like that. Now, these graphs could contain very valuable ESG data that is needed. And so when it comes to XBRL, then the option becomes, hey, could there be further development to support tagging of these graphs? Or maybe is it possible to then have other best practice or implementation techniques, such as including a data table along with the graph that contain these data points, so that data table could be tagged, or potentially, bringing that into again, hidden tagging, the feature that I introduced a little while ago. And so, there are other things, as you all know, ESG disclosures involve some very specific items. For example, greenhouse gas emission. And obviously, the way you would measure greenhouse gas emission could be very different from other financial disclosures. So is it in US dollars? Is it in euros? Well, this greenhouse gas emission is actually in the CO2 equivalents, tons of CO2 equivalents. Now, don't make any assumptions that all these needed unit or elements or other stuff are all readily available, because they actually do develop over time. So for example, this particular unit of CO2 equivalent, TCO2e, was actually added to the unit registry in 2021 after the public comment period was over on the draft SASB taxonomy. And so I would not be surprised that as company build up experience in applying XBRL to their ESG reports, that more and more of these things would be identified and there are opportunity for further development in XBRL in order to properly support them. And that's pretty much all the examples I have to share today. I am now going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Michelle.
Anna, thank you so much. I'm actually going to turn it over to Dean now, who's going to talk through some of the recommendations from the working group that Mohini discussed a little bit earlier.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let me get the screen up here. Title slide available, visible?
Yes, looks great.
Great, okay. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity. This is a section where we detail some of the recommendations that are listed in an upcoming paper from the working group. And this is more technical and conceptual in nature. So rather than demonstrating a particular filing, we're going to talk about how the magic happens behind the scenes. So we're going to cover, if time permits, 3 recommendations from the more than a dozen that are in the upcoming paper. And the recommendations are that in the ESG reporting area, that the data should be rendered as machine readable, that the data should be represented in a manner that allows us to accurately and through automation aggregate and disaggregate the data. And third, that we can use machine readable mechanisms in order to mediate or manage multiple ESG frameworks. Usually the details in a report are hidden in plain sight in a PDF file, or they might be completely invisible. What we're after here as we work towards a machine readable representation is to make those details visible and available for computation. That's our goal here, is if we're going to take advantage of all the ESG reporting that's happening globally, in order to scale, we're going to need to have machine readable data. And so the question is, what do we mean by machine readable data? Well, when we speak of machine readable, we're making the distinction between information structured for eyes versus structured for computation. So we could say what we're after is ESG data should be structured for computation. And this begs the question, what kinds of computation, what kinds of knowledge about ESG activities and status should be available for computation? Well, the first level of detail, that should be machine readable, is merely that there are facts being reported, that there are data points of interest. Ideally, the data points would also have an ID associated with them so that we could refer to them by that ID. In the world of the internet, there are existing mechanisms called URIs, Universal Resource Identifiers, which are used as IDs that look like a URL. But the point is the same. We want to be able to know that facts exist, and we want to be able to identify them unambiguously. The second level of machine readability would be fundamental attributes about the value that's being reported. For example, the data type of the data point. If it's numeric, we would want to know if it's rounded. We'd want to know the unit of measure, if it's euros or dollars or US dollars per British thermal unit. The third level of detail we'd recommend is that capturing the reporting entity, who's making the report, what was the date of the measurement, what report is this part of. These are all things that we would want to have be machine readable. And the fourth type of attribute is a semantic attribute. Semantics are simply about meaning. And meaning is critically important because we want to eliminate the ambiguity and know exactly what each data point means. Now, capturing the meaning is something that can be achieved by applying existing global standards, which allow for the encapsulation of all these details in that tidy machine readable package. And critically, this tidy package needs to capture details about the meaning. And you saw this in the ETSI report, that we could see a human readable version, but on the side, we also had very specific terms associated with those values. And those terms are unambiguously defined so that we know the value is more than just a number. So let's get into an example more to what it means to be machine readable, how it might get represented. This is a page from a manufacturing company's 2020 ESG annual report. It's one page from more than 200, and we're going to focus on just this section about it, on material efficiency and recycling, and we're going to pull this apart into its machine readable components. Zoomed in. So let's take a look at the first thing we're after, which is, are there data points on here? Well, we can see, and we would want our machine readable representation to identify that there are 30 distinct data points, and this should be explicit in a machine readable representation of this filing. Second, we would want to know the fundamental attributes about those data points. In this case, we could see it's in the text that these are all rounded to the nearest whole number, and the unit of measure is metric tons. The next attribute we're after is about the reporting attributes. These are actually not in the table, they're actually in the header of the page. And it tells us this is for ABC Manufacturing Company, and these measurements are for the calendar year of 2020. And lastly, we're after the meaning. What's kind of funny here is if you just looked at this table and you looked at a number like 22, you would say 22 metric tons of what? The what is actually hidden way out over here. The what is, this is the total amount of waste from manufacturing that is recycled. The second classification we get to see is that these numbers can be disaggregated by a classification of hazardous or non-hazardous. We can also see that there's a second classification for aggregation or disaggregation. That's the disposal method: reuse, recycling, composting. So there are 9 methods of disposal plus a total. Now we can take a look at an individual fact, say 22, and we want to get to its meaning. We actually know it's the aggregation of these different terms. 22 is the total amount of waste from manufacturing that is classified as hazardous and that is recycled through the disposal method. Or in this case, I'm sorry, classified by the composting method. So this gives you an idea of how we can unambiguously have 30 unique data points and capture the meaning for them. So again, the recommendation is we need to make all this level of detail machine readable. So let's talk about how that might be done. If we look at this report again, we're looking at the primary meaning of each of these data points, the total amount of waste from manufacturing recycled. But there's another label on this page which is important to us. This is a reference to a particular term in an ESG framework that's represented by this ID. So regardless of what the label says here, this is the real deal of what it means. And so here we are. What we have is a term that's actually defined in the ESG framework, which in this case happens to be the SASB framework. And it's also defined in a taxonomy, in a machine readable representation of that framework. And this happens to be implemented in XBRL. So when we say we want something machine readable, I want to emphasize that we're always starting and holding up as first and foremost importance is the framework itself, and that the machine readable representation of the framework is built upon that expertise that's captured in the framework. So the meaning, again, starts with the framework. It has terms defined in the framework. It has relationships between the terms in the framework. And these relationships are important. For example, it is important to know that the material that may be recycled may be classified as hazardous or non-hazardous. It's important to know that there's a relationship between the different disposal methods and that these are disposal methods for a recycling process. Now, in order to represent these relationships, they can be organized in we'll say a data dictionary, in contrast to the specialized dictionary, the domain dictionary of the ESG framework. By needing to represent the relationships as well, it's probably better to think of this as a taxonomy, if you remember high school biology. This allows us to relate how these terms work together in order to express unambiguously the meaning of the data points. So again, direct relationship between the framework and a taxonomy, a machine-readable representation of that framework, which is then used to annotate data in order to create what we all want, standardized data that's machine-readable. So in conclusion of this first recommendation, we need to implement ESG frameworks as taxonomies, ideally through global non-proprietary standards for encoding the taxonomy. There are a number of languages that are available for this, like XML, JSON, RDF. XBRL just happens to be a really well-tailored choice for business information such as this. Now we'll move on to our second recommendation, and that is to enable the data to be accurately aggregated and disaggregated. By that I mean, we want automation to be able to take totals, break it down into its parts or its contributors. We want, through automation, for the computer to be able to generate totals from smaller numbers. And we want the computer to be able to validate those aggregations, basically flip the numbers.
Dean, before we move on to the rest of the second recommendation, I apologize, but we do need to do some poll questions.
Yes.
So if I could just break in and quickly bring up some polls here. So my apologies to everybody. You can actually keep your screen up, but I'm going to start with our first poll here, which everybody should see right now. And the first question, which XBRL feature could be used to render charts or graphics in ESG reports machine readable? Is it transformations, hidden tagging, or dimensions? So which feature in XBRL can render charts or graphics machine readable? So we'll just take another 20 seconds or so on this. And then we're going to have one more question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and bring up our second question. All right, and the next question, what is the name of the organization created by the IFRS Foundation tasked with creating digitized ESG standards? Is it the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the Value Reporting Foundation, or the International Sustainability Standards Board? The organization created by the IFRS Foundation to create digitized ESG standards. So just like another 20 seconds here. And we did receive one question about when the paper was coming out. Dean, I had mentioned that it may be in the next few weeks. Is that accurate?
A few weeks, 2 to 4 weeks.
Great. Okay, I'm going to end this poll now. And thank you very much, everybody. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Dean. So apologies for the interruption there.
Oh, no worries. You'll have to advise us on what we're going to do with time, since we have such a wealth of material and such a dearth of time.
Well, I think we may end up going about 10 minutes over. So I think if we, want to just go with that. Okay.
All right. So we're going to continue with our prior example. Again, we're back to talking about aggregation and disaggregation. As we already know in this example, every data point here is about the total amount of waste from manufacturing recycled. That's a common attribute for them all. We also know that these data points can be aggregated or disaggregated by a hazardous classification, and that they can be aggregated or disaggregated by a disposal method classification. If we look at it a different way, instead of looking at the numbers, which we did here, we're going to look at the intersections of meaning, and we'll quickly see that on each row for the disposal method, every data point on that row is about reuse. Every data point on the second row is about recycling, third row composting. Similar uniformity in the columns. This hazardous column is all hazardous material and non-hazardous material. This is how, when we think of like building a taxonomy or building a framework that becomes implemented as a taxonomy, is we need to understand or goal ourselves to have narrowly defined terms so that we can understand how the facts relate to each other, not as 30 different facts, but as actually facts with overlapping meaning, because that's where we get to the disaggregation capability. So we need our framework and our taxonomy first to represent the distinct classifications of hazardous and non-hazardous, and that there's a total. Second, we need to represent the classifications. Another classification in this example is disposal method, that there's 9 disposal methods plus a total. And we also want to represent the mathematical relationships, right? And with the mathematical relationships known, that hazardous and non-hazardous can be totaled, the computer would then know the relationships between these numbers. And further, that the computer could then validate the mathematical dependency between them, so that the value reported for the total is equal to the sum of these other values that would roll up to it. We can also take a look at the total, down columns. We can also have it applied to the grand total. So by building a model of what's in the framework, we're now enable ourselves to automate and leverage the machine readable representation to automate the validation of the data quality. And I'll add one more point, which is because we know how the data is detailed, we're able to understand how they are similar in meaning, what's the overlap in meaning, and what is in distinction, what's in common and what's in distinction. And to have the computer do this for us instead of our eyeballs. Okay, so how is this made machine readable, right? We know we need to have terms defined. We know we need to have and the relationships defined between the terms. And one way of representing that is through, just have the language called Pig Latin. This is sort of pig data modeling. The purpose here is just to say, here's one way you might look at declaring the relationships between terms in an outlined format, where again, we have the primary attribute, that these are facts about the total amount of waste from manufacturing, recycled. And then we have ways of disaggregating that total by hazardous classification, and these are our choices, or the disposal method, and these are the choices. So you need to think of this by that. So a document may feel comfortable, but it's not particularly useful for computation. So which would you rather do? Look through 200 pages of this with your eyeballs or searching for strings, or actually make searches that are based on the actual machine readable representation of the data? Again, this is what we're after in this presentation, to reinforce the need to take our frameworks and to make them machine readable. So the conclusion is, define terms to the level of detail wanted, rely on the ability to have overlapping terms on a single data point, define the relationships wanted or permitted between terms, and do this in both the framework and also in the taxonomy. That's how we get there. Now we're on to our third recommendation. Again, these are just 3 of the more than dozen recommendations that are in the upcoming paper. Now, this topic of managing multiple ESG frameworks, it's a lot of interest to people. It's an interesting question. And we need to answer this question because there is no single framework that'll work in all cases. And even if there were, the cases would change over time. And as they change over time, we'll end up with frameworks from one year to the next year. The data will need to be related over time. And so there will always be a need to find a way to relate one framework to another. And so how is that done? Well, we're going to talk about very briefly how that's done and who's responsible for implementing that mediation. So we'll start with some slides that are familiar. Remember this one, 22, it's described as the aggregation of these three different terms: total amount of waste, classified as hazardous, recycled through composting. And that's how we get to understand the meaning of that 22. But there is another way of looking at this, just for grins. What if we wanted to approach it as a monolithic tag, essentially a single label that pulls it all, gloms it all together, that this value 22 is the total amount of hazardous waste from manufacturing recycled by the composting disposal method. Despite being a mouthful, it's still accurate. But let's talk about the difference between breaking it down into these narrow descriptions versus this one monolithic description. So in the narrow description, what we have to its benefit is that those three terms allow us to distinguish 30 different data points. And we also have the ability to have the machine aggregate or disaggregate the data. When we use a monolithic term, we actually need 30 of them, one for each data point. And this makes aggregation and disaggregation difficult because you don't know how they overlap. On the left, we do know how any fact overlaps with any other. On the right, we wouldn't know that because the labels are just these monolithic terms. It also adds a burden to frameworks makers who have to define 30 unique terms. The people who produce the machine-readable implementation of the framework as a taxonomy, they need 30 terms. The recommendation is to break it down in details. Now you may ask, what does this have to do with mediating multiple ESG frameworks? Well, the need for mediating multiple frameworks is the same as this example here. If we think of it this way, let's say we have one framework that represents this level of detail as three narrow terms, and another framework XYZ, represents it as a monolithic term. Now we could just say, hey, people who are producing these ESG reports and the people who use the data, they'll figure this out, or they'll have to learn that these two are actually semantically equivalent. But that puts the onus on the many thousands of data consumers out there. It should be considered, I think, a job of the experts who are defining the frameworks to create a machine-readable representation that mediates between their framework and the other frameworks that exist. How is this done? We'll cruise through that so we can get to our questions. Remember that we can apply multiple narrow terms onto a single value. Remember that we can relate terms to each other that are in the same ESG framework, the same ESG taxonomy. And now the approach would be to relate a term in one taxonomy or framework to a term in the other. And that actually can be done using existing data encoding languages like XBRL, that we could create a taxonomy that relates terms in one framework to another. This is the meaning of these relationships is important because the arrow does signify there's a connection. There's actually meaning behind each of these connections. And languages like XBRL provide a set of relationships that can be established between terms. And XBRL is also designed so that set of relationships can be extended. So an ESG frameworks maker or the community can decide on other types of relationships that are specific to their domain of reporting that they would want to capture when they mediate between frameworks. Point is, all this is technically feasible today. It's been technically feasible for 20 years. We just need to know that it's more broadly that it's possible, and then the technology can be applied. So the third conclusion is, to manage ESG frameworks via machine-readable mechanisms, you need to define the relationships you want between the terms. You need to create an extension taxonomy that asserts these kinds of relationships. And really, my recommendation is it should be done by the frameworks providers rather than leaving it to the data consumers, the NGOs, or regulators to do that. And I think we're now ready for our last CPE questions.
Dean, thanks very much. Let me quickly pull up the next CPE question. Okay, the question is, what is the definition of semantic attributes? Is it information about what the data point means, for example, average rate residential natural gas? Is it information about the reporting context, like what the entity is about, the date of the measurement? Or is it information about each data point, for example, data type? Okay, we got about another 30 seconds here. All right, we're going to close down the poll. Go to our final question. Which of the following ESG frameworks has developed an XBRL taxonomy? Is it CFD, GRI, or SASB? Okay, so just like another 20 seconds or so here. Okay, and I think we're going to close down that poll. All right, well, I want to thank our speakers. I think this has been a great presentation. I actually want to turn it over to Anna in a minute, just to address some assistance that she got in preparing the reports today. Anna?
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Yes, I just want to take a very quick moment to thank Moody's and SEs again for allowing us to present their XBRL tag document here and helping us learn, all the practical matters in applying XBRL to ESG reports. So thank you again for all the great assistance.
Great, thanks, Anna. And I want to thank Anna and Dean in particular for their leadership in, heading up this working group. It's been challenging to, identify all the issues that we've identified in various ESG reports and to figure out how data standards can be used to support this kind of reporting. So we're very excited about the paper that's coming out. We will have it done, as Dean said, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and it's going to include a lot of the content that you see here that you saw in the presentation today. We're also going to have another webinar probably in the coming weeks, and in probably a couple months also on the ESG topic, and we're going to bring some other people into that one as well. So thank you so much, Mohini, Anna, Dean, and thanks to everybody for joining us today.